this is where they spent their time during the war, getting her sister to take part in that address to the young people to sort of put them at ease. What was their relationship like over the course of time? And we've seen portrayals, of course, in The Crown and elsewhere. Margaret struggling in a way, if you will, with the public nature of the role, but the limitations of the role, because after all, it was her sister who would become queen and eventually was the queen while Margaret obviously was still alive. Tell us a little more about their relationship.
Yes, it's a fascinating relationship. They started off as sisters, and then and both as princesses. Then one became queen, and the other one had to curtsy to her sister. And essentially, Margaret's role in life was to be the wing woman or the wing person, the supporter, whose absolute loyalty to the sovereign, this young woman, was there to nourish and help her. And I think it's one of the savage ironies of the last few years that a young man who one day will occupy the position of king doesn't have his wingman, that is to say, Prince Harry, and that there doesn't seem to be a resolution there. With Margaret and Elizabeth, they had their ups and downs, notably with Group Captain Peter Townsend in the 50s, a divorcee who wanted to marry Princess Margaret, which was very much out of keeping with the times. And then Margaret becoming the first woman since Henry VIII to divorce her husband, Lord Snowdon, which again affected their relationship. But throughout it all, Margaret was loyal to her sister, and that's what her sister could count on.
Interesting, loyal to her sister, and the dynamic that is inevitable once you begin curtsying your sibling when they become queen. You did talk briefly there for a moment, Andrew, about William and Harry. I'm curious if you think that relationship will evolve. I know it's an impossible question to answer at this point. We've seen at least a public display of healing between the two of them. Obviously, we don't know what they're going through and how much more work there is to be done. But do you see that relationship evolving at all?
Well, I think that, like everybody else, we hope so, because it's one of great promise, and also it would help to sustain the monarchy going forward. Will they resolve their differences? It's down to them. I know that if their mother was around, she would be using every fibre of her being to resolve it. And I do find it interesting that Harry talks about speaking to his mother when there comes to be big decisions in his life, and I think if he spoke to her about this relationship, hopefully she would say, "Kiss and make up."
Very interesting. Yeah.
I think that's something that is universal. Andrew, thank you so much, and we should point out that Windsor is going to be the new home for William's family.
Yeah, the Prince of Wales, the
Yes,
Princess of Wales.
that's it.
Windsor's home.
Deborah Roberts, I understand you had a conversation with somebody that can enlighten us a little bit.
I did, Robin. Patty Harverson, who spent 10 years at the side of then Prince Charles, who is now the king. And I spoke with him last week, you might remember, when he shed a little light on what the king is now going through and what he's sort of making of his new role. And he was in such admiration of how he has handled this moment, the strain and the stress and the intensity right now, the spotlight. So I spoke with Patty again last night because I was curious a week later how he thought his old boss was doing. He had reached out to him. He, of course, didn't expect to hear back from him just yet. But he said, Robin, that this is the moment. And you, of course, having buried your mother, I've buried mine. Patty had to also deal with that a few years ago. You go through all of these motions, and Prince Charles has done that for the last 11 days. He has met with people. He has drawn strength from, watching his children and his grandchildren now be a part of this ceremony. But he said, this is the final moment. What you're looking at right now, this is the final moment of the final chapter with his mother, and that this is likely to be the most emotional time for this emotional man. And he also said to me that he thinks Princess Anne, who you've seen today looking so strong, is going to be the rock of this family in some ways, because she's very close with her brother. She's very strong. She's cut out of the same cloth as her mother, was very close to her father. He thinks that right now she's going to step in and really sort of give her brother the support that he needs to hold this family together, along, of course, with Queen Consort Camilla. This, though, he says to me, while he can't pretend to know exactly what King Charles is feeling, he said, this has got to be the hardest moment. It's going to be private, as it should be, and his family will get a chance to now grieve privately. But as he said to me, tomorrow, everybody else gets to maybe exhale a little bit, think about what they've been through, but the king begins his new duties. So there is no break for him. And of course, he is a workaholic, according to Patty. And this is something that he, of course, was born to do. And he's been waiting to do this for a very long time. But what you're watching right now is the most emotional and difficult time for him as he says goodbye to his mother. This relationship they had evolved over time. They were very close. So this has got to be really the moment for King Charles right now, the most emotional moment of this whole 11-day period.
Deborah Roberts, part of our extended family here, covering the celebration of Queen Elizabeth II. The long walk has begun in Windsor. We've also begun to see the dignitaries who will be part of this part of the day. Not everyone, obviously, the 2,000 people you saw at Westminster Abbey earlier will certainly be part of this more personal, quieter ceremony, if you will, at St. George's Chapel. We saw former British Prime Minister Tony Blair just moments ago arriving at Windsor. Robert, talk us through the imagery, what we're seeing now. This is equally as important as what we saw earlier. And as Owen said during our coverage, and I think it's important to point out that it's almost as though the state has handed the Queen back to the family for this part.
But David, I think this is really the Queen coming home, finally, because of all of the places, Windsor was her home, and these people have all gathered. It's probably the entire town has turned out to see this and witness this. It's really quite emotional, I think, but it is something that she would have envisaged. But this final walk along the long walk, which she would have done so many times, it's just staggering, I think, that the whole town is there to see her, the military procession as it goes towards the castle, the 1,000-year-old castle built by William the Conqueror. And inside that fortress was her own, where she spent most of the happy times as out of London at weekends with Prince Philip, with her family. And in recent years, once she lost Prince Philip, she was there most of the time. And all of her family, but particularly King Charles, would always stay over the extra night, overnight, just have a conversation with her, to have dinner with her, and just to sort of share those precious moments. So I'm sure that it'll be bittersweet for him. There's the Round Tower, built so many years ago. It's steeped in history, this place, and I think that really she is coming home.
Coming home. And so many people are there to witness this and welcome her home. And Maggie Rulli, I know that you had a chance to speak with some people that are there along the long walk.
Yeah, Robin, it was incredible. I mean, you look at these images and you see more than 100,000 people are expected to line the long walk. Speaking with them, you could just tell how much this moment meant to them. You know, we were there when the funeral service was being played. And I know we've said this word time and time again, but it bears repeating. The silence was so impactful. You had, tens of thousands of people. You could hear a pin drop on the long walk, and then everyone sort of burst into the national anthem, God Save the King, as it started to play. It was emotional. And there right now, what we're witnessing is the continuation of this emotion. Robert was just talking about that word coming home. That's what we heard from a lot of people in Windsor today, saying this was the final moment, the final stretch of her long could be at the place where she will rest for the rest of her days. Robin, I think the long walk, the images that we're seeing, I also want to tell people about the long walk a bit, because it's such a special place. I remember the first time I went and stood on the Long Walk just as a tourist visiting London, and it's really indescribable. You see just this long road, 3 miles in length that seems to stretch on for eternity. So to imagine now the Queen making her final journey down that road, flanked by thousands of people on either side, they're supporting her, they're respecting her. And this really is an incredible, extraordinary moment, and an extraordinary moment that is really the final goodbye for the public. As Robert mentioned, this is the transition right now from the very public goodbye to what's going to become a private family goodbye. As later tonight, there's a private ceremony for the family to say their last words to their mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. So this moment that we're witnessing is really the culmination of this week-long journey, this week-long goodbye, and people having one last chance to say their thank you as she heads home.
Maggie Rulli with her observations from the Long Walk, and Robert mentioned it earlier, Maggie alluded to this as well, and it looks like just about everyone in Windsor has turned out to say goodbye to the Queen and pay their respects. Ian Pannell, our chief foreign correspondent. Ian, what do you make of the Queen going home in these final moments?
Yeah, David, I mean, I think as you and everyone else has touched upon, this is the end of the final chapter, really. It's a moment that everyone has been working towards, and I guess a lot of people have been dreading, because I think there's going to be a real vacuum left by the Queen's final burial there in Windsor Castle. We've seen the crowds here, and I think we've all been, everyone's been commenting the same thing, that yes, of course, it's been very emotional. A lot of people have been grieving, not just about the Queen, but because it brings up other emotions, but also out of respect, out of some sense of acknowledging the Queen's duty, about coming out to say thank you, but also that sense it is the final thank you, and it is the end of her chapter. And me, I'm 55. I've only known the Queen. My father is only slightly older than the monarchy itself, and from a young age, he's also only known the Queen as a monarch. And I think for a lot of people here in Britain, this really is the end of an era. She was our connection, in some senses, to the past, to good times and to bad times, to wars that have always been that constant. Everyone said the same thing. But I think there's also that sense of question about whether Charles will also be able to do that, not necessarily as a reflection of him, but because we've moved on as a country. I think the Queen was given a lot of latitude and a lot of credit by people who had become very different from the citizens of past because of who she was and because of the service that she gave, not just the Commonwealth, but British people, to continue that same relationship with the monarchy. Either way, it's going to have to change. I was lucky enough to spend a day with Charles in Afghanistan, and it was a real eye-opener. We travelled together on a helicopter on a Chinook, and it was just a chance really to see an insight into the man and what he's like. And he is very thoughtful. He's a lot like his mother in many regards. He listens, he wants to know, he's inquisitive, he's educated. But he also is sensitive to people around him. And I think if he's got the chance to kind of bring some of that out, then perhaps, the legacy of the Queen then lives on. But there has to be change. There has to be a moment, I think, and see what really follows the Queen. Is it really possible to fill those very large shoes, David?
And can you speak a little bit more to that? This is Robin, Ian. Because I've heard your reporting this past week, and it's a real balancing act of the respect for Queen Elizabeth, her approval rating 80%, the monarchy not nearly that high, and how are upon it. But can you just go a little bit deeper?
organisations here in Britain, and Charles always ranks fairly low in that list. Now, it's hard for anyone to have competed, not in a pejorative way, but to have effectively competed with the Queen, because of course she gets most of the attention and the loyalty and the love of most to the nation. I think it's been very hard for Charles to emerge from that shadow. Other royals have had a lot more attention on them, whether it's through weddings or publicity or whatever it is, and they've won the hearts and minds of modern Britain. I think Charles is kind of in this curious position of caught between two stools, because he's been so long in the wings. He is part of that old school, but I think, as Robert and others have said here, if you actually get to know him and talk to him, he's actually very, very forward thinking, and he's not as aloof or stiff as he may come across, I think, to some people. And I think if there's an opportunity for that to come forward, then the British people will be ready to form a new relationship with a new monarch. But I think all the allowances that are made for some of the missteps that are made by the monarchy, and some of the extent to which I think a lot of people feel, well, yes, it's a great thing to have, but it doesn't represent us in the same way that it has in the past. I think it's going to be hard to try and bridge that gap. Britain is a very, very different country. And we've talked a bit about the Commonwealth and some of the concerns there about whether they want to have the same relationship with the monarchy, whether they want independence or not. I think a lot of Britons also questioning. David has talked about the difficult economic times that the country's going through at the moment, and the fact that Charles won't pay inheritance tax. Of course, that's in theory, that's not his decision. But at a moment when people are suffering, you know, a lavish funeral where a new monarch who doesn't pay inheritance tax, he's got some distance to travel to achieve the same level of popularity. I think it's an open door at the moment. I think there's a lot of goodwill, and he's probably capable of doing it. I think what little I've seen from him just in that one day in close quarters, it was only myself and one other reporter traveling with him. Like I say, he is very thoughtful. And the other thing about Charles is he'd been wanting to go to Afghanistan for a long time. This was during a difficult time, dangerous, and of course he knew that his son was serving there, even though it was secret at the time. But the other part of his work was his Prince's Trust, which a few of your guests have talked about. And he's been cognizant for a long time about some of the economic disparities in this country, and has worked to try and give opportunities to disadvantaged youngsters. I mean, not many people know that Idris Elba, the A-list Hollywood actor, credits Prince Charles and the Prince's Trust for giving him his start in life. And I saw this in Afghanistan, giving opportunities to women to get training, to get opportunities in the workplace. Now, of course, a lot of that has been lost. But I think he is very socially aware. The question is, can he continue that when he becomes king in the same way? To try and stride